Your brain is running at about 30% capacity right now, and you don't even know it. Right now, while you're watching this, your mind is probably juggling a dozen different thoughts. That work email you need to send, the argument you had with your girlfriend, your fantasy football lineup, what you're having for dinner, whether you should hit the gym later or just skip it again. This isn't focus. This is mental noise, and it's costing you everything. The average American man in his 20s and 30s deals with over 50,000 thoughts per day. But here's the problem. Most of those thoughts are complete garbage. Repetitive loops of anxiety, regret, and distraction that accomplish absolutely nothing except draining your mental energy and keeping you from thinking clearly. And in a world where clarity is power, where the ability to think straight under pressure can mean the difference between getting promoted or getting passed over, between building wealth or staying broke, between confident decision-making or paralysis by analysis, you literally cannot afford to operate with a cluttered mind. But here's the good news. Over 2,000 years ago, some of the most powerful and successful men in history figured out a system for achieving crystal clear thinking, even in the middle of complete chaos. These weren't academics sitting in ivory towers. These were emperors running empires, warriors leading armies, and statesmen making life or death decisions. The Stoics. And they developed 11 specific mental frameworks that can transform your thinking from scattered and reactive to focused and strategic. These aren't philosophical theories. These are practical tools you can implement today to cut through mental fog, make better decisions, and finally experience what it's like to have complete mental clarity. If you're tired of feeling mentally overwhelmed, if you're done with analysis paralysis, if you want to think with the kind of clarity that gives you an unfair advantage in every area of life, then you need to hear these 11 lessons. Drop a comment right now saying, "Clear mind," if you're ready to level up your thinking. And make sure you're subscribed to Strength Within, because we're building a community of men who refuse to operate at anything less than peak mental performance. Let's get into it. Lesson 1. Question everything you think you know. Here's something that's going to mess with your head. Most of what you believe is probably wrong. Not because you're stupid, but because your brain is constantly taking shortcuts, making assumptions, and filling in gaps with information that might be completely inaccurate. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. Seneca, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers, wrote extensively about how our expectations and assumptions create more problems than reality itself. Think about your daily life. How many times have you been absolutely convinced about something, only to discover later that you were completely wrong? You assumed your boss was mad at you, but they were just having a bad day. You were certain that girl wasn't interested, but you were just reading the signals wrong. You thought the project would take 2 hours, but it took 8. These aren't random mistakes. They're systematic failures in thinking that happen when you accept your initial thoughts without questioning them. The first lesson in achieving clear thinking is brutal but necessary. Embrace doubt and actively question your assumptions. Here's how this works in practice. Challenge your initial reactions. Your brain generates instant judgments based on limited information and unconscious biases. These snap judgments feel right because they're automatic, but they're often flawed. I know a sales manager in Dallas who used to make hiring decisions based on first impressions during interviews. If someone seemed confident and well-spoken in the first 5 minutes, he'd mentally check the hire box. If they seemed nervous or awkward, he'd write them off. Then he started tracking his hiring success rate and realized his gut instinct was wrong more than 60% of the time. The confident candidates often underperformed, while some of his best team members were people who had awkward first interviews but strong work ethic and skills. So he changed his approach. Now, whenever he has a strong initial reaction to a candidate, he deliberately asks himself, what evidence actually supports this impression? What am I assuming based on limited data? Could I be wrong? This simple practice of questioning his initial thoughts dramatically improved his hiring decisions. Seek out people who disagree with you. This one's uncomfortable, but it's essential. We naturally surround ourselves with people who think like us. It feels good to have our opinions validated. But it also creates an echo chamber where our biases get reinforced and we never challenge our thinking. The Stoics actively sought out opposing viewpoints, not to argue or win debates, but to test their own thinking and identify blind spots. Try this. Find someone you respect who has a completely different perspective on something you care about, politics, business strategy, relationships, whatever. Then actually listen to their reasoning without immediately trying to refute it. You don't have to change your mind, but exposing yourself to different frameworks forces you to think more rigorously about why you believe what you believe. Practice. What if, thinking instead of accepting the surface-level explanation for something, dig deeper. Ask yourself, what if the opposite were true? What if I'm looking at this from the wrong angle? What if there are factors I'm not considering? I know a product manager in Seattle who uses this technique before every major decision. When his team proposed a new feature that everyone was excited about, instead of just approving it, he spent 30 minutes asking, what if questions? What if users don't actually want this? What if it cannibalizes our existing features? What if it creates technical debt we can't afford? What if our competitors launch something better before we do? This mental exercise revealed several potential problems they hadn't considered, which led to significant improvements in the feature before launch. Play devil's advocate with yourself. This is the Stoic practice of negative visualization applied to your own thinking. Take your strongest belief or assumption about something and deliberately construct the best possible argument against it. Not to defeat yourself, but to stress test your thinking. If your position can't withstand scrutiny, it probably needs refinement. The goal here isn't to make you constantly doubt yourself or become paralyzed by uncertainty. It's to build intellectual humility, the recognition that your thinking might be flawed and you should remain open to evidence that contradicts your current beliefs. The guys who think most clearly aren't the ones who are certain about everything. They're the ones who actively question their certainty and update their thinking based on new information. Start practicing this tomorrow. Pick one strong opinion you have about something at work or in your personal life. Then spend 10 minutes genuinely trying to poke holes in it. Ask yourself what assumptions you're making, what evidence contradicts your view, and what you might be missing. This mental discipline, the willingness to question your own thinking, is the foundation of clarity. Everything else builds on this. Lesson 2. Define what actually matters to you. Most guys are sailing through life without a compass. They're reacting to whatever comes their way, making decisions based on what feels urgent or what other people expect. But they've never actually stopped to define what they're trying to accomplish. This is like trying to navigate across the ocean without knowing your destination. You might be busy, you might be moving, but you have no idea if you're going the right direction. The Stoics were obsessed with clarity of purpose. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, constantly reminded himself to examine his goals and ensure his actions aligned with his values. Here's the lesson. You cannot think clearly about anything until you're clear on what you actually value and what you're trying to achieve. This sounds obvious, but most guys skip this step completely. They pursue goals that society told them to pursue, make money, get promoted, buy stuff, without ever asking if those goals actually matter to them personally. Let me give you a concrete example. I know a consultant in Chicago who was grinding 70-hour weeks trying to make partner at his firm. Everyone told him that partnership was the goal. His parents were proud of his trajectory. His peers were competing for the same thing, but he was miserable. Constant stress, no time for relationships, health deteriorating. Still, he kept pushing because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Then he did something radical. He took a weekend alone and actually defined his values. Not what his parents valued, not what society valued, what he actually valued. Turns out, autonomy, creativity, and time for relationships ranked way higher than status or money above a certain threshold. The partnership track directly contradicted his core values, which is why he felt so empty despite external success. He ended up leaving the firm and starting his own consulting practice. Makes less money, works fewer hours, has more control over his time, and actually enjoys his work. Same person, same skills, but completely different trajectory once he got clear on what actually mattered. Here's how you do this. Identify your core values. Take 30 minutes and write down what actually matters to you. Not what should matter, not what you think is supposed to matter, what genuinely matters. Maybe it's freedom, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's security, maybe it's making an impact, maybe it's adventure. There's no right answer, just your answer. Convert values into concrete goals. Once you know your values, translate them into specific objectives. If you value freedom, what does that look like practically? Maybe it's building a business that doesn't require your constant presence. Maybe it's getting out of debt so you're not dependent on any single paycheck. If you value impact, what does that mean? Maybe it's mentoring younger guys in your field. Maybe it's building products that solve real problems. Make your goals specific, measurable, and time-bound. Not be healthier, but lose 15 pounds and run a 5K by summer. Ensure alignment between goals and values. This is crucial. Your goals should serve your values, not contradict them. If you value family time but your goal is a promotion that requires constant travel, there's a misalignment. Doesn't mean you can't pursue the promotion, but you need to be aware of the trade-off you're making. Most guys experience chronic dissatisfaction because they're achieving goals that don't actually align with their values. They're climbing the ladder only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall. Build flexibility into your system. Your values might evolve as you grow and learn. What mattered to you at 25 might be different at 35. That's normal. The Stoics understood that wisdom requires adapting to new information while staying true to core principles. Build in regular check-ins, maybe quarterly or annually, where you reassess whether your goals still align with your values. When you have clarity on what matters and what you're trying to achieve, every decision becomes easier. You have a filter for evaluating opportunities. You can confidently say no to things that don't align with your purpose. That clarity is the foundation of strategic thinking. Without it, you're just reacting to whatever comes your way. Lesson 3. Recognize how your brain tricks you. Your brain is lying to you, right now, about all kinds of things. And until you understand how it's deceiving you, you'll never achieve true mental clarity. The Stoics didn't have modern neuroscience, but they understood that human perception is fundamentally flawed. We see what we expect to see. We remember what confirms our beliefs. We notice evidence that supports our views and ignore evidence that contradicts them. These aren't character flaws, they're cognitive biases, systematic patterns of deviation from rational thinking. And they affect every single person, including you. Here are the most dangerous biases that cloud your thinking. Confirmation bias. This is your brain's tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what you already believe while ignoring or dismissing contradictory evidence. Example: you believe your company's new strategy is doomed to fail. So you notice every small problem, every setback, every criticism. But you don't notice or remember the successes and positive signs because they don't fit your narrative. This creates a self-reinforcing loop where you become more and more convinced you're right, regardless of actual reality. How to combat it? Actively seek out evidence that contradicts your position. If you think something won't work, deliberately look for examples of it working. Force yourself to engage with the strongest arguments from the opposing viewpoint. Availability bias. You overestimate the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If something is vivid, recent, or emotionally charged, your brain treats it as more probable than it actually is. Example: you see a news story about a plane crash, and suddenly you're nervous about flying, even though driving to the airport is statistically far more dangerous. Or you hear about someone who got rich with cryptocurrency, and suddenly you think crypto is a guaranteed path to wealth, ignoring the thousands of people who lost money. How to combat it? Base decisions on actual data and statistics, not on memorable anecdotes. When evaluating risk or probability, gather comprehensive information rather than relying on whatever examples your brain can easily recall. Anchoring bias. You give disproportionate weight to the first piece of information you encounter, using it as a reference point for all subsequent judgments. Example: you're negotiating salary for a new job. The employer offers $80K even if you were hoping for $100K. That initial $80K number now anchors your expectations. You might negotiate up to $85K or $90K, but you're still anchored to their initial offer rather than thinking independently about what the role is actually worth. How to combat it? Be aware of initial numbers and first impressions. Before negotiations or major decisions, establish your own independent assessment of value before you're exposed to someone else's number. The bandwagon effect: you adopt beliefs or behaviors because other people have adopted them, regardless of whether they actually make sense for you. Example: everyone in your industry is talking about AI and automation, so you assume your company needs to immediately integrate AI into everything, even if you haven't actually analyzed whether it solves a real problem you have. How to combat it? When you notice yourself thinking, "Everyone is doing this," pause. Ask yourself, is this actually right for my situation, or am I just following the crowd? Make decisions based on your specific circumstances and goals, not on what's trendy. I know a real estate investor in Phoenix who almost lost a lot of money because of bandwagon effect. Everyone in his network was buying rental properties in a specific neighborhood that was the next big thing. Prices were climbing fast, and there was FOMO, fear of missing out, around getting in before it was too late. He almost pulled the trigger on 3 properties, but then he forced himself to step back and analyze objectively. What are the actual fundamentals of this market? What's driving the price increases? Is this sustainable or a bubble? When he ran the numbers without the emotional influence of everyone else is doing it, he realized the prices didn't make sense based on rental income potential. He passed on the deals. 6 months later, that market corrected hard. Prices dropped 20%. Everyone who bought at the peak is now underwater on their investments. He avoided a costly mistake by recognizing and combating the bandwagon effect. The key lesson: understanding these biases doesn't make you immune to them, but it allows you to catch yourself when they're influencing your thinking. You can't eliminate cognitive biases, but you can develop the awareness to identify them and consciously work against them. Start by picking one bias, maybe confirmation bias since it's so common, and actively watch for it in your thinking over the next week. When you notice yourself seeking out only information that confirms what you already believe, force yourself to engage with contradictory evidence. This practice of catching and correcting your own biased thinking is how you develop genuine mental clarity. Lesson 4. Gather complete information before deciding. Imagine making a major investment decision based solely on one article you skimmed or one conversation with a friend who's into that stuff. Sounds ridiculous, right? Yet this is exactly how most guys make decisions in other areas of their lives. They form strong opinions based on limited, often biased information. Then they defend those opinions as if they're based on comprehensive analysis. The Stoics, who valued reason and logic above all else, understood that clear thinking requires comprehensive information from diverse sources. Epictetus taught, "It is not the events that disturb us, but our views about them. And our views are only as good as the information they're based on." Here's the lesson. Before forming a strong opinion or making an important decision, actively seek out diverse perspectives and comprehensive evidence. This is harder than it sounds because of 2 factors. First, gathering diverse perspectives requires effort. It's much easier to confirm what you already think than to genuinely investigate alternative viewpoints. Second, we live in algorithmic filter bubbles. The content you see online is curated to reinforce your existing views. Social media feeds you more of what you already agree with. Your social circle likely shares your perspectives. You have to deliberately break out of these bubbles to get complete information. Here's how. Consult multiple high-quality sources. Don't get your information about important topics from a single source or a single type of source. If you're researching investment strategies, don't just read one blog or listen to one podcast. Read books from experts with different approaches. Look at academic research. Analyze actual data. I know a startup founder in Austin who was deciding whether to raise venture capital or bootstrap his company. Instead of just talking to other venture-backed founders, who would obviously have a bias toward VC, he deliberately sought out successful bootstrapped founders, VCs themselves, to understand their perspective and incentives. Founders who had tried both paths, financial analysis, comparing the two approaches, academic research on venture capital. Outcomes: this comprehensive research revealed nuances he hadn't considered and helped him make a much more informed decision. He ended up bootstrapping, but with specific criteria for when he might consider VC later. Engage with people you disagree with. This is uncomfortable but essential. Find people who have smart, well-reasoned perspectives that differ from yours. Then actually listen to understand their reasoning, not just to formulate your counter-argument. This doesn't mean you'll change your mind about everything, but it forces you to refine your thinking and identify weak points in your position. Test your conclusions against reality. The ultimate test of any belief or decision is how it performs in actual reality. The Stoics were deeply practical. They cared about what worked, not what sounded good philosophically. Before fully committing to a major decision, look for small ways to test it. Want to start a business? Don't quit your job immediately. Test the concept with a small pilot first. Thinking about moving to a new city? Spend a month there before making the permanent move. The clearest thinkers aren't the most opinionated. They're the most willing to gather comprehensive information, seriously consider opposing viewpoints, and update their thinking based on evidence. This is how you avoid costly mistakes and make decisions you won't regret later. Lesson 5. Create space between stimulus and response. Here's a scenario you've probably experienced. Someone sends you an email that pisses you off. Maybe it's your boss being unreasonable, or a client being demanding, or a coworker throwing you under the bus. Your immediate impulse is to fire back an angry response. Your fingers are already moving toward the keyboard. You're mentally composing the perfect takedown that will put them in their place. Then, if you're lucky, something makes you pause. You step away from the computer. You take a walk. You sleep on it. The next morning, you reread the original email. It's still annoying, but not nearly as inflammatory as you thought. And that angry response you were about to send would have been a career-limiting mistake. This is the power of creating space between stimulus and response, and it's one of the most important Stoic lessons for clear thinking. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The key insight: you can't always control what happens to you, but you can always control how you respond. The problem is that most responses are automatic, driven by emotion rather than reason. The solution is to deliberately create a gap, even a tiny one, between something happening and your reaction to it. In that gap, you can choose a thoughtful response instead of a knee-jerk reaction. Here's how to build this skill. Recognize your emotional triggers. Everyone has specific situations that trigger automatic emotional reactions. For some guys, it's feeling disrespected. For others, it's feeling controlled or criticized. Identify your triggers. What situations consistently make you react emotionally before you've had time to think? Just having this awareness gives you a fighting chance to catch yourself when triggered. Practice the pause when you feel that surge of emotion. Anger, anxiety, defensiveness. Train yourself to pause before acting. Literally count to 10. Take 3 deep breaths. If it's a message or email, close it and commit to not responding for at least an hour. This sounds too simple to work, but it's incredibly effective. That brief pause allows your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, to come back online after the emotional part, amygdala, has been activated. I know a lawyer in New York who deals with opposing counsel who deliberately try to provoke emotional reactions. Early in his career, he'd take the bait, getting angry, responding defensively, making tactical mistakes. Now he has a strict rule: never respond to a provocative email or letter the same day he receives it. Always sleep on it. Respond the next morning after he's had time to think strategically rather than emotionally. This simple practice has made him far more effective in negotiations and litigation. Ask better questions when something happens that triggers a strong reaction. Train yourself to ask, what is this situation actually requiring from me? What would the best version of myself do right now? Will the action I'm about to take move me toward my goals or away from them? These questions interrupt the automatic reaction and engage your rational mind. Develop perspective. The Stoics were masters of zooming out and seeing the bigger picture. When something feels like a crisis in the moment, ask yourself, will this matter in a week, a month, a year? Most things that trigger strong emotional reactions turn out to be relatively minor when you gain some temporal perspective. The guys who consistently make poor decisions aren't stupid, they're reactive. They let external events control their internal state and their responses. The guys who think clearly and make good decisions have mastered the pause. They've created space between what happens to them and how they choose to respond. This is a skill you can develop starting today. The next time something triggers a strong emotional reaction, practice the pause. Don't act immediately. Create that space. Then respond from a place of reason rather than emotion. This single skill will prevent more mistakes than almost anything else you can learn. Lesson 6. Base decisions on logic, not emotion. Emotions are data. They provide valuable information about your values, needs, and responses to situations. But they're terrible decision makers. The Stoics understood this distinction perfectly. They didn't advocate for suppressing emotions or becoming robotic. They advocated for acknowledging emotions while not allowing them to dictate your choices. Marcus Aurelius faced immense challenges: wars, plagues, political betrayals, personal losses. He experienced the full range of human emotions, but he didn't let those emotions drive his decisions as emperor. Here's the core lesson. Emotions can inform your decisions, but logic and reason should make your decisions. This matters because emotional decision-making leads to predictable failures. Impulsive choices. When you're angry, you might quit a job without having another one lined up. When you're lonely, you might get back together with an ex who's wrong for you. When you're excited, you might make an investment without proper due diligence. Emotions compress your time horizon. Everything feels urgent. You sacrifice long-term benefit for short-term emotional relief. Distorted interpretations. Your emotional state colors how you interpret information. When you're anxious, neutral situations seem threatening. When you're depressed, solvable problems seem insurmountable. When you're euphoric, you ignore legitimate risks. Escalated conflicts. Most destructive arguments aren't about the actual issue at hand. They're about emotions spiraling out of control. Someone feels disrespected, so they say something harsh. The other person feels attacked, so they escalate. Before long, you're in a full-blown fight about who did the dishes, but really it's about feeling unappreciated. So how do you make decisions based on logic while still acknowledging emotions? Name your emotions when you're experiencing a strong emotion. Simply identifying and naming it creates psychological distance. I'm feeling angry right now is different from I am angry, which fuses your identity with the emotion. This labeling engages your prefrontal cortex and reduces the intensity of the emotional experience. Identify what's driving the emotion. Dig deeper. What need or value is this emotion pointing to? Maybe you're angry because you feel disrespected. Value, dignity. Maybe you're anxious because you're uncertain about the future. Need, security. Maybe you're excited because you see opportunity. Value, growth. Understanding what's beneath the emotion gives you useful information without letting the emotion control your response. Ask what a rational person would do. This is a powerful reframing technique. When you're emotionally activated, ask yourself, if I were completely calm and rational, what would I do in this situation? Or even better, what would I advise my best friend to do if they were in this exact situation? This creates distance and allows you to tap into your rational mind even while experiencing strong emotions. Delay major decisions. The Stoics advocated for this constantly. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." If you're making a decision while emotionally activated, whether that's anger, fear, excitement, or anything else, delay it if at all possible. Make the decision when you're in a calm, neutral state. I know a business owner in Denver who almost fired a key employee after a heated argument. He was furious, convinced the employee was insubordinate and needed to go. But he had a rule: never make personnel decisions while emotional. So he went home, cooled off, slept on it. The next day, he could see the situation more clearly. The employee had legitimate concerns that came out poorly because they were also emotional. The real issue was a process problem, not a people problem. He addressed the process, had a calm conversation with the employee, and retained someone who's still a valuable team member years later. If he'd acted on emotion, he would have made a costly mistake. Embracing logic over emotion doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means respecting your emotions as valuable data while ensuring your reason makes the final call on important decisions. Practice this daily. When you feel a strong emotion arising, notice it, name it, understand it, and then consciously choose a logical response rather than an emotional reaction. Lesson 7. Develop emotional awareness and regulation. Here's something most guys never learn. Your emotions don't have to control you. Right now, you probably experience emotions as something that happens to you. Someone criticizes you and suddenly you're angry. You face a deadline and suddenly you're anxious. You see an attractive woman and suddenly you're nervous. It feels automatic, like you have no choice in the matter. But the Stoics discovered that you have far more control over your emotional state than you think. This lesson is about understanding emotional hijacking and preventing it. Emotional hijacking is when your emotional brain, the amygdala, completely takes over your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. In that state, you're literally incapable of clear thinking. Your body is flooded with stress hormones. Your perception narrows. Your time horizon compresses. You make terrible decisions. This happens to everyone. But some guys get emotionally hijacked constantly, while others maintain their composure even under extreme pressure. The difference isn't that some guys don't feel emotions, it's that they've developed the skill of emotional regulation. Here's how to build this crucial skill. Recognize the physical signs emotional hijacking has. Physical symptoms: elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, tunnel vision. Learn to recognize these signs in your own body. When you notice them, that's your early warning system telling you you're getting emotionally activated. Be careful. Practice deep breathing. This sounds like basic advice, but it's physiologically powerful. When you take slow, deep breaths, you activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your body's stress response. Try this. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 6 counts. Repeat 5 times. This simple technique can shift you from fight or flight mode back to calm rationality in just a couple of minutes. Create physical distance if you're in a situation that's emotionally activating you: a heated argument, a stressful meeting, a difficult conversation. Physically removing yourself can be incredibly helpful. I need to step outside for a minute, or let's take a break and come back to this, gives your nervous system time to reset. I know a project manager in San Francisco who used to have explosive arguments with his team when projects weren't going well. His anger would escalate, he'd say things he regretted, and team morale suffered. Now when he feels that anger rising, he has a simple rule: I'm going to grab some coffee. Let's reconvene in 15 minutes. That 15-minute break allows his emotion to subside so he can address the actual problem rationally rather than just venting his frustration. Reframe the situation. Often, emotional hijacking happens because of how you're interpreting a situation, not the situation itself. Your boss gives you critical feedback. You interpret it as, he thinks I'm incompetent, I'm going to get fired. Cue anxiety and defensive anger. But what if you reframed it as, he's investing time in making me better. This feedback is an opportunity to improve. Same situation, completely different emotional response. The Stoics were masters of reframing. They constantly practiced seeing situations from different angles to avoid being controlled by their initial emotional reactions. Build your capacity through practice. Emotional regulation is like a muscle, it gets stronger with use. But you can't wait until high-stakes situations to practice. Start with small daily frustrations. Traffic, slow Wi-Fi, someone cutting in line. These minor annoyances are perfect training grounds. When you feel irritation rising, practice, notice it, breathe, reframe, respond calmly. Do this consistently with small frustrations, and you'll build the capacity to regulate emotions even in high-stakes situations. The difference between guys who maintain clarity under pressure and guys who fall apart comes down to emotional regulation. It's not about being unemotional, it's about not being controlled by your emotions. Start building this skill today. The next time you feel a strong emotion arising, don't just react. Notice it, name it, breathe, create space, choose your response. This is how you develop unshakable mental clarity even in emotionally charged situations. Lesson 8. Master the art of listening. Most guys are terrible listeners. They're not bad people, they just never learned how to actually listen. Instead of listening, they're waiting for their turn to talk. Instead of trying to understand, they're formulating their response. Instead of being present, they're thinking about something else entirely. This isn't just rude, it's a massive blind spot in your thinking. The Stoics understood that you cannot think clearly about complex issues if you only consider your own perspective. You need input from others, and you can't get quality input if you're not actually listening. Epictetus taught, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But real listening, active, engaged listening, requires deliberate practice. Here's what real listening looks like. Give complete attention. This means putting your phone away, closing your laptop, making eye contact, actually focusing on the person speaking instead of mentally drifting to your next meeting or that text you need to send. This is harder than it sounds in our distraction-addicted culture, but it's essential. When someone is speaking to you and you're obviously not fully present, they notice, and they stop sharing valuable information. You lose access to insights that could inform your thinking. Listen to understand, not to respond. Most guys listen just long enough to formulate their counterargument or insert their own opinion. They're not trying to understand. They're waiting for a pause so they can talk. Real listening means suspending your need to respond and genuinely trying to understand their perspective, their reasoning, their concerns. Even if you disagree, even if you think they're wrong, first understand completely what they're actually saying. Ask clarifying questions instead of assuming you understand. Ask questions that help you grasp their full meaning. Can you help me understand what you mean by that? What led you to that conclusion? Can you give me an example? These questions demonstrate that you're actually trying to understand, not just waiting to disagree. Reflect back what you heard. A powerful listening technique. Briefly summarize what someone just said in your own words and check if you understood correctly. So what I'm hearing is that you're concerned about X because of Y. Is that right? This serves 2 purposes. It confirms you understood correctly, and it makes the other person feel genuinely heard, which makes them more willing to share valuable information. I know an executive in Boston who completely transformed his leadership effectiveness by improving his listening skills. He used to dominate every meeting, talking 80% of the time, always ready with an answer or opinion. He thought this demonstrated leadership and expertise, but he realized he was missing crucial information. His team would raise concerns that he'd immediately dismiss or talk over. Important problems weren't getting surfaced because people knew he wouldn't really listen. So he made a radical change. In meetings, he committed to listening 70% of the time and talking only 30%. He asked more questions and gave fewer directives. The result? He made better decisions because he had better information. His team felt more valued and engaged. Problems got identified and solved earlier. Same person, same intelligence, dramatically better outcomes, just by listening better. The connection to clear thinking. Here's why listening matters for mental clarity. Every conversation is an opportunity to expand your understanding, challenge your assumptions, and identify blind spots in your thinking. But you only get that benefit if you're actually listening. When you listen well, you gather diverse perspectives that help you think more completely about complex issues. When you listen poorly, you operate in an echo chamber of your own thoughts. Start practicing active listening today. In your next conversation, commit to talking less than 50% of the time. Ask questions. Seek to understand completely before offering your own perspective. You'll be amazed at how much valuable information you've been missing just because you weren't really listening. Lesson 9. Speak and think with precision. Vague thinking leads to vague results. If your thoughts and words are fuzzy and imprecise, your actions and outcomes will be fuzzy and imprecise. The Stoics valued clarity and precision in both thought and communication. Seneca wrote, "The shortest and surest way is to lay the cards on the table," meaning clear, direct communication beats vague hints and implications. This lesson is about developing the habit of thinking and speaking with precision. Why does this matter? Prevents misunderstanding. When you communicate vaguely, people fill in the gaps with their own assumptions. This leads to misaligned expectations, preventable conflicts, and wasted effort. We should probably think about updating the website sometime. Leaves everything unclear. Who should do it? By when? What specifically needs updating? I'll create a plan for website updates by Friday, and we'll review it in Monday's meeting. Is precise. Everyone knows exactly what's expected and when. Sharpens your own thinking. The process of expressing ideas precisely forces you to think more clearly. If you can't explain something clearly, you probably don't understand it clearly. I know a software engineer in San Diego who used to give vague updates in stand-up meetings. Working on the back-end stuff, making progress, should be done soon. His manager pushed him to be more precise. What specific component are you working on? What percentage complete? What blockers exist? What's your specific completion target? At first, this felt annoying and overly detailed. But it forced him to think more clearly about his work, identify problems earlier, and give realistic estimates. His productivity actually increased just from thinking more precisely. Builds credibility. When you speak precisely, people take you more seriously. Vague language makes you sound uncertain or like you're trying to obscure something. Compare these. We're doing pretty well on the project, mostly on track, should hit our goals. We're 73% complete, on schedule to finish by November 15th, with 2 minor risks we're actively managing. Which person sounds more competent and trustworthy? How to develop precision. Define your terms before discussing complex topics. Define what you mean by key terms. Different people often use the same words to mean different things, which creates confusion. We need to improve customer satisfaction. Means something different to everyone. Be specific. We need to increase our net promoter score from 45 to 60 by the end of Q3. Use concrete examples. Abstract concepts are hard to communicate clearly. Concrete examples make your meaning crystal clear. Instead of, "We need better team communication," say, "We need daily 15-minute stand-ups where each person shares what they're working on and any blockers they're facing." Eliminate unnecessary qualifiers. Words like maybe, probably, kind of, sort of, I think dilute your message and make you sound uncertain. Sometimes uncertainty is honest and appropriate, but often we add these qualifiers out of habit, not because they add value. Compare. I kind of think we should maybe consider probably updating the process. We should update the process. Ask for and provide specific feedback. When someone gives you vague feedback, ask for specifics. Good job, right arrow. What specifically did I do well? This needs work, right arrow. What specifically should I change? And when you're giving feedback, be specific. Not, your presentation wasn't great, but your presentation would be stronger if you led with the key finding and supported it with the data on slides 5-7. The practice of thinking and speaking precisely might feel uncomfortable at first if you're used to vague language, but it's one of the fastest ways to improve both your thinking and your effectiveness. Start today. In your next meeting or conversation, commit to being specific. Use concrete numbers, clear timelines, and precise language. Notice how it changes both the quality of the discussion and the outcomes. Lesson 10. Never stop learning. Your brain, like your body, atrophies without regular exercise. If you're not actively learning and challenging yourself mentally, your thinking becomes rigid, limited, and increasingly disconnected from reality. The Stoics were committed to continuous learning. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor with unlimited demands on his time, studied philosophy daily. He never stopped trying to improve his understanding and refine his thinking. Here's the lesson. Continuous learning isn't optional if you want to maintain mental clarity. It's essential. Why learning matters for clear thinking. Expands your mental models. Every new skill you learn, Every new field you study, every new perspective you encounter adds to your mental toolkit. The more models you have for understanding the world, the better equipped you are to think clearly about complex problems. A guy who only understands business through a finance lens will miss important factors that someone with psychology, systems thinking, or historical perspective might catch. Keeps your brain adaptable learning new things, especially hard things that challenge you, keeps your brain plastic and adaptable. You maintain the ability to think flexibly, see new patterns, and adjust your thinking when circumstances change. Guys who stop learning become mentally rigid. They apply yesterday's solutions to today's problems and wonder why nothing works anymore. Challenges your assumptions every time you deeply study something new. You encounter ideas that challenge what you thought you knew. This is uncomfortable but valuable. It's how you identify and correct flawed thinking. Sparks creativity. Some of the best insights come from combining ideas from different fields. But you can only make those connections if you're learning broadly. How to build a learning practice. Read daily. Dedicate at least 20-30 minutes a day to reading. Not scrolling social media or news headlines, but actually reading books, long-form articles, or substantive content. Mix fiction and non-fiction. Eat in your field and outside it. Read different perspectives and time periods. I know a financial advisor in Miami who reads for an hour every morning before work. He rotates between finance, psychology, history, and philosophy. This breadth of reading gives him insights that his competition, who only read financial news, completely miss. Seek intellectual challenge. Take online courses in subjects you know nothing about. Learn a language. Study a technical skill. Join a philosophy discussion group. Do something that genuinely stretches your brain. The specific subject matters less than the mental exercise of grappling with unfamiliar concepts. Engage in quality conversations. Surround yourself with people who know things you don't. Ask questions. Listen to their expertise. Let them challenge your thinking. Some of the best learning happens in conversations with people who are smarter than you in specific domains. Apply what you learn. Learning is most valuable when you actually use it. Don't just consume information, apply it to real problems in your life. Read about negotiation. Use those principles in your next salary discussion. Learn about habit formation. Design better systems for your own goals. Study leadership. Implement those concepts with your team. Stay curious. The moment you think you've figured everything out is the moment your thinking starts declining. Maintain beginner's mind, the humility to recognize how much you still don't know. The clearest thinkers aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who remain most open to learning more. Make continuous learning non-negotiable in your life. Your mental clarity depends on it. Lesson 11. Take care of your body and mind. Here's something most guys don't realize. You cannot think clearly if your body is a mess. Your brain isn't some separate entity floating above your physical condition. It's an organ that depends entirely on your physical health. Poor sleep, bad nutrition, lack of exercise, chronic stress, all of these directly impair your cognitive function. The Stoics understood this connection. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself," and that includes being master of your physical health. Marcus Aurelius maintained rigorous physical discipline despite having unlimited access to comfort and luxury. He knew that mental clarity required physical vitality. How physical health affects thinking. Sleep deprivation destroys cognition. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, planning, and impulse control, essentially goes offline. You become more impulsive, more emotional, less able to focus, and significantly worse at complex problem solving. Your memory suffers. Your decision-making deteriorates. Guys who consistently sleep less than 7 hours are operating with significantly impaired cognitive function, even if they don't feel tired. Nutrition fuels brain function. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight, but uses roughly 20% of your energy. When you eat garbage, excess sugar, processed foods, insufficient nutrients, your brain doesn't have the fuel it needs for optimal function. You get brain fog, difficulty concentrating, mood instability, and decreased cognitive performance. Exercise enhances neurological function. Regular exercise increases blood flow to your brain, promotes the growth of new brain cells, improves memory and learning, and reduces stress hormones that impair thinking. Guys who exercise regularly literally think more clearly than sedentary guys, independent of any other factors. How to optimize physical health for mental clarity. Prioritize sleep. Make 7-8 hours of quality sleep non-negotiable. Set a consistent sleep schedule. Create a dark, cool sleeping environment. Avoid screens for an hour before bed. If you're only making one change to improve your thinking, start with sleep. The ROI is massive. Eat for brain function. Focus on whole foods, vegetables, fruits, lean proteins, healthy fats, especially omega-3s from fish, nuts, and seeds. Minimize processed foods, excess sugar, and alcohol, which significantly impairs sleep quality even in moderate amounts. Stay hydrated. Even mild dehydration impairs cognitive function. Move your body daily. Minimum 30 minutes of exercise most days. Mix cardio for cardiovascular health and neurogenesis with strength training for hormonal health and metabolic function. It doesn't have to be complicated. Walking, running, lifting weights, sports, whatever you'll actually do consistently. Manage stress. Chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, which impairs memory, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Build stress management practices into your routine. Meditation, deep breathing, time in nature, hobbies that engage you, quality time with people you care about. Create mental downtime. Your brain needs periods of rest and recovery, just like your muscles do after a workout. Build in time for mental rest, not just sleep, but waking rest where you're not actively problem-solving or consuming information. This could be walking without podcasts, sitting quietly, engaging in a hobby that doesn't require intense focus. I know a tech executive in Seattle who completely transformed his mental performance by fixing his physical health. He was the classic workaholic, sleeping 5-6 hours, eating poorly, never exercising, constantly stressed. His thinking was foggy. He made poor decisions under pressure. His creativity was shot. He knew something had to change. He committed to 3 simple changes: 7.5 hours of sleep nightly, 30 minutes of exercise before work, and eliminating alcohol on weeknights. Within 3 weeks, his mental clarity improved dramatically. Better focus, better decisions, better emotional regulation, more creative problem solving. Same job, same challenges, completely different mental capacity. The lesson: you cannot separate mental clarity from physical health. If you want to think clearly, you must take care of your body. This isn't optional, it's foundational. We've just covered 11 powerful Stoic lessons for achieving crystal clear thinking. One question: everything you think you know. 2. Define what actually matters to you. 3. Recognize how your brain tricks you. 4. Gather complete information before deciding. 5. Create space between stimulus and response. 6. Base decisions on logic, not emotion. 7. Develop emotional awareness and regulation. 8. Master the art of listening. 9. Speak and think with precision. 10. Never stop learning. 11. Take care of your body and mind. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts. They're practical tools you can implement immediately to cut through mental fog and develop the kind of clarity that gives you an unfair advantage in every area of life. But here's the thing: knowing these lessons doesn't change anything. Applying them consistently does. So here's your challenge: pick one lesson from this list, just one, and commit to practicing it deliberately for the next 7 days. Maybe it's creating space before responding emotionally. Maybe it's questioning your assumptions before making judgments. Maybe it's prioritizing sleep so your brain can actually function properly. Choose one. Practice it daily. Build the habit. Then add another lesson the following week. This is how you transform your thinking from scattered and reactive to focused and strategic. One practice at a time, consistently applied. After 7 days, come back and drop a comment telling us which lesson you chose and how it impacted your thinking. Share what worked, what was challenging, what surprised you. We're building a community here at Strength Within of men who are committed to operating at peak mental performance. So engage, share your experience, contribute to the collective wisdom. If this video provided value, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started with content that will help you think more clearly, make better decisions, and build the kind of life you actually respect. The ancient Stoics figured out how to maintain mental clarity in the middle of chaos, uncertainty, and immense pressure. Now it's your turn to apply their wisdom to your modern life. Clear thinking is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed through deliberate practice. Let's get to work.